In my experience, and especially with my personality, there are four words that if spoken or messaged or emailed, they elicit an immediate internal response, either of fear, concern, or even dread. And you see if this works for you too. The four words is if somebody were to say to you or message you, we need to talk. Like, do any of us have like a good response to that? Like, oh, well, I'm really looking forward to this. You get that, and especially if it's somebody close to you. Maybe it's your romantic interest or a spouse or a son or daughter. Hey, we need to talk. Or if you've had a boss approach you and say, hey, can you stay late? Can you come in a little early tomorrow? We need to talk. I mean, is that ever a good thing? And I think for all of us, like there's this visceral internal response that happens, like concern, fear, even dread, depending on the source. And then once those words are heard or they're read immediately, every single one of us, there rises a question, right? Why? Like, why? What about? Because we want to know. And when do we want to know? Like now, okay, right now. That's our natural human response. It's to feel anxiousness or to feel fear because we expect what we're about to be told is going to be something bad or something that is going to negatively impact or affect our life in a negative or a painful way. And the worst thing is to not be told immediately. Like, it's okay, we'll talk later. Or let's just talk until the morning, because then what are we doing over the next hour or several hours until the next morning? It's like we're worrying. We're locked into this guessing game. Like what is it? We're trying to figure out what have we done wrong? What could the bad news possibly be? And here's why I bring this up. I bring this up because we began this series just 2 or 3 weeks ago with a passage from the last book in the New Testament in which Jesus says this about himself. He says, "Behold, here I am. I stand at the door and knock. And if anyone hears my voice and opens the door," and what we hear Jesus saying is, we need to talk. That's why I'm standing out here. And our assumption is that whatever he wants to talk about is probably not good. It's probably going to be painful or inconvenient to hear because now we're going to have to make some big change in our life. But surprisingly, what Jesus says, if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and I will eat or I will dine with that person, and they with me. And we discovered last week that you and I have a God who, what he most desires is relationship with you and with me, a relationship characterized by intimacy. And we define intimacy as being fully known and fully loved without fear of rejection or retribution. A relationship that is defined by trust, knowing that God has promised, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. And as hard as it is for us to wrap our mind around that, because that's not the human experience, because all of us have had people who promised to not leave us, and they did, or not to abandon us, and they did, or people that we should have been able to rely on and trust, and they broke that trust. And so it's hard for us to wrap our mind around or understand how it works, what it looks like. But what we've discovered thus far is that God, more than anything else, as we're going to see today, he desires a relationship of trust, proximity, and intimacy with you and with me. And today we're going to look at an Old Testament passage that demonstrates just how committed God is to this. And if you're someone, as I'm talking this morning, you feel disconnected or distanced or even disenfranchised from God, my hope is that as we look at this passage today, that you will be able to leave here today and go, wow, could God really be like that in my life? Now, the past 2 weeks, we've looked at the book of Genesis, and we've discovered that in the very beginning, God created man and woman in relationship for relationship, with himself and with one another. And in this perfect context, they knew God, God knew them, they knew one another, and there was no fear, there was no suspicion, there was no pain, there was perfect trust and a very real connection with God. And God gave man what we talked about last week, the incredible, terrible gift of freedom. And just like we have done in our personal lives, man and woman abused that gift of freedom and freely chose to reject trust and intimacy with God. And when man did that, into the world came 3 things that we struggle with every single day: sin, sorrow, and death. And from that point on, when sin, sorrow, and death entered the world, man and woman has been suspicious of God. We're not really sure that we can trust God because of the pain, the suffering, the injustice all around us in the world and throughout history. And we talked about that at the very beginning, they're in the Garden of Eden. And Adam and Eve eat the fruit that God told them not to eat. And by the way, as a side note, it could have been anything. It could have been like, there's one rule. Don't cross that river, or don't go over here. So whatever rule it would have been, it could have just been one. We still would have found a way to break it. He finds Adam. Adam and Eve eat the fruit that God told them not to eat. God comes looking for Adam. He finds Adam, says, hey, what's going on? And remember what Adam said. He said, the woman that you put here with me, she gave me some of the fruit of the tree, and I ate it. And these two were the first of billions throughout history who would blame God and one another when we experience bad things in life. So consequently, we inherently struggle to trust God. And Jesus says, behold, here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. And what we assume is we're in trouble. We need to talk. But what we saw last week is the moment that the relationship with humankind was broken, we were separated from God, that God immediately launched into his plan, his grand plan to do what only he could do, to fix, reestablish connection, trust, and intimacy with mankind, with womankind. And the whole Bible is simply an epic story of God's pursuit to save and reconcile and reconnect with you and with me. And it's a story of redemption. And today we're going to continue that story with our next major character in the book of Genesis. It's a story that many of you are familiar with. But in this interaction, we see in the clearest of clear ways how intentional and tenacious God is about reestablishing that kind of connection and relationship, the one that he had at the beginning, a relationship of knowing, of trust, of intimacy. And our character's name is Abram. He was a man that was just simply out there living, surviving, minding his own business. This is 4,000 years ago. So no Bible, no church, no formality. He didn't even know how to pray. He's just doing life. And one day God showed up and began talking to Abram. Now, we don't know what that looked like. And if the idea of God talking to a human seems kind of fairy tale-ish, maybe a little mental illness, listen, if God who created space, time, and matter and us wants to talk to us, he'll figure out a way to do it, to communicate. So God tells Abram, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. And then 4,000 years later, here we are talking about him. We're all familiar with the nation on the other side of the world. And when God says, I'm going to make you a great nation, what that meant to Abram is that you're going to have kids, which he was very happy about because he was very, very old. So was his wife, and they had none. And then he says, through future generations, they're going to have millions of children who become a nation, and you will be a blessing, or as seen as blessed. And I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse you. And then very significantly, he says, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And this was huge. Yet 10 years pass before God even shows up again. And he repeats the promise, but nothing has changed. Then another 15 years pass, and God shows up, he repeats the promise, but this time Abram's like, okay, God, so don't be mad, but I don't see how you keeping your promise can come true, because my wife and I are way past childbearing years. And we still have no children. And so if you've ever felt like God is taking way too long to answer your prayers, feel like he's way too long, maybe even fulfilling a promise, you feel like maybe he's promised you, that if you just wonder, maybe he's forgotten, like you're not alone. So God took Abram outside and he said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And then he said to them, so shall your offspring be. And all this land around you, I'm going to give this land to your family and to your future generations. And we're told this very important piece, that Abram believed the Lord, and he, God, credited it to him as righteousness, reaffirming what God desires most, for us to just trust him, for you and I being fully known and fully loved without fear of rejection. And then God does an amazing thing which serves as a preview of what God ultimately wants to do in your life and in mine. He establishes a covenant with Abram. A covenant that would be for a group of people, a preview of a future covenant that he would make that would be for all people. Now, this is important it's important we understand covenants in ancient times for us to understand the significance of the story and how it connects to us. Because in our culture, we deal with contracts. But a covenant, the way it was established in ancient times was the word covenant, it basically means to bond something together, literally to shackle two things together. So in a covenant, you've got two people or two nations or two families, and they would come together and they would make an agreement, and it's as if they were saying, we are shackling ourselves, bonding ourselves together. We are making a promise to one another. And then the covenant had 4 parts. The first were the terms. This is where you decided and defined what, I'm going to do this, if you do this, and you'll do this, if I do this, and then there was the oath. That after you decided on the terms of the covenant, then you actually spoke an oath. Then the third thing that would happen is there would be a ratification, where they would go through some sort of symbolic exercise to demonstrate the fact that they're entering in to this covenant. And then finally, there was a curse. And the curse was, if you don't do your part, this is the bad that's going to happen to you. If I don't do my part, here are the bad consequences that will happen. Now, if you've ever been to a wedding, you've seen 3 of the 4 parts of an ancient covenant. And you've seen it in the wedding ceremony. A pastor, a priest, or whoever's officiating, they're up there, they've got the couple standing there, and he does what's called a charge. It's something along the lines of, do you promise to love and cherish and all of this stuff? And then he asks them a big, long question, and the groom says, I do, the bride says, I do. Well, those are the terms of the covenant that they're going into. But instead of an oath in a ceremony, we call them something different. We call them a vow. So the vows are like the oath, like I promise to do this, she promises to do that, and then how do we symbolically ratify the covenant of the marriage? Rings. We exchange rings. So we say this ring represents my vow, my promise, my dedication, all of my worldly goods. Like when Sean and I got married, not lots of worldly goods, but it's just like, I'm putting this ring on your finger, I am making these commitments, she put the ring on my finger, we're making these commitments. Now, I've done hundreds of weddings in my life. And the one thing that we don't have in the wedding ceremony that I'm thinking about adding to mine is the curse. Because maybe that's why too many marriages don't hold up. But, because we've taken out the curse. But back then, there were all kinds of ways to then ratify a covenant in this culture. In some, and for us, it'll sound weird, but you would actually exchange shoes. I'd give you my shoe and you'd give me yours, and another, they would exchange salt. So I would take a pinch of salt out of my bag, I would put it in your bag, you would take a little pinch out of your bag, and you would put it in mine. And this was to demonstrate, just a visual thing, if you're ever in need or if there's ever a time of famine, you can depend on me to come and provide for you and vice versa. In the Old Testament, 950 years after Abram, the king's son Jonathan gave the future king David all of his weapons. And this was a common form of covenant that said, I am pledging to you all of my strength and all of my power. And should the day come that you're ever in danger or in trouble, I will bring to bear all of my strength and all of my power to help you, whatever the problem might be. So there's all kinds of covenants. But the most significant and the most binding was the blood covenant. And in the blood covenant, you actually killed an animal and spilled their blood. And what that represented was, as we just did to this animal, so be it unto me if I don't follow through on my commitment. It also represented that I am dying to my right to not fulfill the commitment that I am making to fulfill this promise. And just like once the animal was dead, that was irrevocable, so the blood covenant was irrevocable. It was a decision. And in a blood covenant, what they would do is they would take an animal, or they would take animals, they would cut them in half, probably why we don't do this at weddings, it would be very messy, make for a good barbecue. They would lay the halves separate from one another, and then the two people entering the covenant would join hands, and then together they would walk between the two halves of that animal. And basically, what they were saying symbolically was, we are entering into the death of this animal, and may it be done unto me as it was done unto this animal if I don't keep my end of the deal. Okay, so back to the story. Abram's going, God, you promised me children in this land, and you say everybody in the world is going to be blessed through me, but at this point, I'd just like to have one child. So God said to Abram, look, I'm going to do something to help assure you that I am indeed going to fulfill my promise to you. So God initiated and entered into a covenant with Abram. And this covenant, again, it's a foreshadowing. It just affirms, once again, God's deep desire to enter into an intimate covenant relationship with you and with me. So if you have a Bible or Bible app you'd like to follow along, we're going to be in the Old Testament, first book of the Old Testament, Genesis chapter 15. We'll start with verse 9. While the verse is on the screen, I'd encourage you to read the story later on. It's an incredible story. But Genesis 15, verse 9. So the Lord said to Abram, bring to me a heifer, a goat, a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. And Abram brought all these to him. And then you look what he did. Abram cut them in two and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. And as the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep. A thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there, but I will punish the nation that they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age, and in the 4th generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. And there is so much here that I just do not have time to unpack this morning. But knowing what you now know about covenant, what do you expect Abram was expecting to happen at this point? He's got all the animals sliced and diced. They're separated on two sides. Well, Abram would have just assumed that he was going to have to, part of it would be for him to walk down the middle between these parts, between these animals, to enter into this covenant with God. And then God would say, okay, here are the terms. I'm going to do this, but you're going to need to do this. I'm going to make you a great nation, but part of me making you a great nation means you're going to do this. This goes both ways because that's how covenants work. But that's not what happens. In verse 17 it says, when the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared, and it passed between the pieces. And on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. Now you can read the rest of it later, but what was Abram's part? What was going on? When you read it, Abram basically just sat to the side and he watched this whole thing happen. You know what that meant? It meant that God entered into a covenant with Abram requiring nothing of him. God made a promise and committed himself to the deepest level, making a blood covenant with a man, and the man did not have to do or commit to anything. God was basically saying this to Abram: I don't care about what you do. I don't care how bad you foul it up. I am going to make you a great nation. It is all on me. This is not dependent on you in any way. I am going to bring you back to this real estate and establish for your descendants a nation. And from that nation, every other family in the world will be blessed. Now let me ask this question. Why would God do such a silly thing? I mean, at first, when he had humankind exactly the way he wanted them, they abused their freedom, they rejected him, they introduced unimaginable sin, sorrow, and death into the world. Why would God come back to that same flawed, sinning human race that is now far worse than when he was just dealing with Adam and Eve? Why would God promise unconditionally to bring about something that would ultimately bless all the nations of the earth? It's because on the day that everything broke, that the Creator launched his relentless mission to reconnect with his prized creation. And God knew if any part of the covenant was based on Abram's faithfulness, your faithfulness, my faithfulness, his ability to get it right, his ability to be good enough, the whole thing would fall apart, just like it did with Adam and Eve. I mean, have you kept all of your promises to God? I haven't. We just don't, because we're just too flawed. We're just too short-sighted. We're too inconsistent. So God says, I love them and I just understand they're not capable of doing it. So I am taking it all on myself. This is completely my responsibility. Why? Because that is how important the human race is to God. And about 15 years later, Abram finally had a son who had a couple of sons. And one of those sons had 12 or 13 sons. And then the whole family ended up immigrating to Egypt, just like God said they would. It's an amazing story. And they multiplied and they grew into a nation right under the noses of the Egyptians. And 400 years, imagine 400 years. Finally, a man named Moses leads the nation out of Egypt. He marches them right back to the spot where God made Abram all these promises. And over the next 13 to 1400 years, leaders rise, leaders fall, kings rise and fall. There's battles in every single generation. The leadership makes poor choices and they mess up, and they go through cycles of being faithful, being unfaithful, being faithful, being unfaithful. And what did God do? He just kept his eye on the ball. I mean, you talk about a mess. Just read about the history of the nation of Israel, the story of Israel. It's just one inconsistency after another, and yet God stays focused. I will not be deterred. I am going to bring through this flawed, fickle nation a person who will bless every family on earth. And finally, 2,000 years after God made this unconditional promise, in the town of Nazareth, in the middle of the land that God promised, an angel shows up to a young teenage girl. And he says, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you. I have some great news. You are going to have a son, and you're going to call him Yeshua, or what we typically know from the Greek, Jesus. And he's going to be the Savior of the world." And then he went over to wake up Joseph. Says, "I've got some great news for you. Your fiance is pregnant." Doesn't seem like great news. It's great news. Her son will fulfill the prophecy that Isaiah made hundreds of years before when he wrote, "The virgin will conceive and give birth, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God with us. And Christmas is just one part of a multi-part, multi-millennial episode that began when God said, "I am not giving up on the human race." Later, Jesus would describe God like a shepherd who had 100 sheep but lost one. And he goes after that lost sheep relentlessly until he finds it. That God is like a woman who lost a very, very precious coin. And she moves everything in the house and she sweeps the whole house until she finds that coin. That God is like a father who lost his son. A son who came to him, looked him in the eye, and said, "I wish you were dead so that I could have my inheritance now. I want my stuff now." So the father says, "Okay." And he sells half of his stuff. He gives him his inheritance ahead of time. The son leaves. Some time passes. And after blowing it all on food and drink and prostitutes, he returns home. He's destitute. He's ashamed. And yet the father, representing God in the parable, seeing him a long way off returning up the road, he runs to the son. He embraces him. He throws a huge party because the son of mine was dead and is alive again. And this is what God is like from the first book of the Old Testament to the last book in the New. And we see God in pursuit to reconnect with mankind, with you and with me. God said, "Here's my strategy. I'm going to birth a nation. And from that nation, I'm going to bring about a Messiah. And through that Messiah, I'm going to offer salvation to every person, family, and nation for every generation to follow." See, we think, Emmanuel, God is angry. Emmanuel, God is disappointed in us. Emmanuel, God wants to shame us. Emmanuel, God wants to punish us. Emmanuel, God can't be trusted. But Matthew says, no, 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 no. It is Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. I'm here. Just let me in." And he's not going to give up. He's not going to let your bad experience with religion or your sin or your guilt or your shame. Turn him away. He loves you too much. I mean, some of you in the past, you've had a bad religious experience. I think God would look at you and say, listen, don't let there be distance. Don't avoid me because some Christian or some church messed you up. Come to me with it. And when you're finished telling me your sad story, I want you to read about my son's bad experience with religious people. He's got scars from his interaction with religious people, so you have something in common. So don't avoid me or keep distance from me because of what happened to you in church. Some of you, even though you may come to church in your day-to-day life, if you're honest, you keep God at arm's distance because of sin or guilt in your life, or maybe there's a secret, this thing you keep holding on to, and you just don't want to deal with God because you're afraid of what He's going to say or what He's going to ask you to do. And God's going, come on, just try me. Just put all your cards on the table and just talk to me about your sin, your struggle, your fears, your anger, whatever it is, what you think, I think. Just try me because I already know it, but I'm in pursuit. Some of you, maybe the reason you keep God at arm's length is because you're mad at Him, because He didn't act the way you thought He should act in a specific situation. You're angry with Him maybe because something happened, or you lost something, or you lost someone, or you had a painful experience that you didn't think you should have, or you didn't have the positive experience you thought you should. You've been hurt. And there's a part of you that's mad at God because you know He could have prevented it, and He didn't. And maybe you spent weeks, maybe months, maybe even years, letting your anger at God keep Him at a bit of a distance, or a long distance. Instead of saying, God, listen, I'm angry. I'm going to bring this front and center. I'm going to tell you how I feel. God can handle that. God would be honored that you would even consider bringing that to Him. And you can talk as loud as you want, use whatever words you want. You can be emotional because He already knows they're in there. He already knows how you feel. But He's relentless. He's not going to give up. It's a relationship. Just tell me. Just share it with me. Pour it on me. So as I wrap up, here's the question I just want to send you off with. What's the wedge between you and God? Is there a wedge between you and God? What is it? Is there something that's keeping you from experiencing true connection and true intimacy with God? Is it, as I described in week 1, that honestly, you're too busy? Like I said this, you're just too busy trying to manage all the details of your life, your individual life, your married life, your family life, and you've got calendars, clocks, and watches, but you have no time. Is it because deep down, maybe you feel like God may love me, but I'm pretty sure He doesn't like me? You're afraid He'll reject you, or that honestly He really already has rejected you, like somehow the grace of God can't overcome whatever the shortcomings are that you see in the mirror. I mean, here's an important question. Just ask yourself, why would God send His Son to die for you, knowing everything there is to know about you ahead of time, and then reject you? Like, that just doesn't make sense. Is it because you assume maybe you already know what God's going to say, so you just don't talk to Him? Like, maybe some of you're like me, you've got a decision to make, and it's a little iffy decision, and there's just certain people, like, I should ask for wise advice, but you already assume what they're going to say. Like, no, I don't want to ask for their advice because I know what they're going to say. And maybe you treat God that way sometimes. I don't bring it to Him because I'm pretty sure I know what He's going to say. Jesus is going, God's going, come on. Just open the door. Just let me in. God, with a plan that started 4,000 years ago, He wants to connect. And He's not going to give up until there is no hope. Because, not to get too far ahead of things, and I talked a lot about this in August of this last year, but one of the things that we discovered in the New Testament is there is a time clock. There is a time clock on how long we have the freedom to choose to open the door. The freedom to reject or accept God. And the clock runs out at one of two moments. Our final breath or Jesus' return. Because once one of those moments happen, the curtain is completely pulled back. We will see God, we will see Jesus as they truly are, and the experience will be so overwhelming that there's no choice to be made. It's like having your hand in a fire. It's just an involuntary reaction to pull it out. And Jesus and his closest followers make it clear throughout the New Testament that there's a sense of urgency. Because your final breath or Jesus' return, that it will come, as Jesus says, it'll come like a thief in the night. You don't expect it. And it's unexpected, but once that happens, then your fate is sealed. But until that moment, the choice is entirely yours, which is why God is relentless in his pursuit. I've told the story many times. When our boys were young, we were at Silver Dollar City in Branson. When suddenly we realized that our 6-year-old was missing. And in a moment, I wasn't concerned about the 3 that were still with us or my lovely wife who was with me. My sole focus was on finding and being connected with my lost son. And I was fully ready to risk jail to make a big enough scene to shut that entire park down in order to find, secure, and be reconnected with my lost son. Your heavenly Father, the perfection of Father, everything a good father should be. He wants to reconnect with you and the people in your life. He wants to reconnect you at the most intimate level and for you to know him, to be with him, not just heaven when you die. And as you prepare to enter the new year, would you just consider doing yourself a favor, if you've been doing any of these things, to just quit. Maybe it's to quit pretending, quit hiding, quit keeping God at a comfortable distance, quit making excuses as to why you're just too busy to make time for God. Would you maybe this Christmas season, as I talked about last time, make it a priority to daily get alone with God? Specifically, I suggested just 15 minutes a day, preferably in the morning, to just get alone in a room, or if you got a walk-in closet, or you've got an office, some space that you've got access to, maybe to get alone with God and just go, I'm not making any big promises. I've kept you at a distance, or I've been mad, or God, honestly, I'm struggling to trust you right now. Or God, I do things because I'm a Christian, but I'm not really into relationship. I'm just going through the motions, but I want to begin to know you. I want to really know you, to experience you. And as we enter the new year, to just do that relational thing with God in an attempt to connect with him at a level that maybe you've never done before. Time alone. Connected to this thing is just, I want to invite every single one of you as we enter this new year, is to go on a journey with me and several of others that have already said they want to be part of this. And that is starting January 1st. That is to journey through the entire Bible in a year. Some of you have never done that. Some of you, it's been a long time. But to go through the Bible in a year, because as I've explained before, the Bible is not a book. The Bible is a gathering of 66 incredible documents written over a period of 2,000 years in 3 different languages by 40 different authors from 3 different continents, telling one story. The story of redemption. It's why we celebrate Christmas. Emmanuel, God with us. That God took the first step and did what only he could do to pursue you and to pursue me, because he loves you. He wants to connect with you, for you to know him, to experience him, to dine with him, to walk with him in your day-to-day life. So have you got any walls or wedges between you and God? Would you be willing sometime this crazy week to just get alone with him and just tell him? To just pour it out, all of it. And then open his word and say, okay, Lord, you've listened to me. Now I want to listen to you. Would you do that? Would you be willing maybe to go so far as to sit down and just do an inventory of your life, just 1 week? Just 1 week, keep track of where every minute goes. See, when it comes to money, Dave Ramsey, he said for years, and when it comes to money, if you don't tell it where to go, you'll wonder where it went. The same is true with our most valuable, limited asset, our time. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. So maybe one of the best things you could do is just sit down 1 week, just do an audit of your time every minute for just 1 week to determine where did it all go, and where was it invested well, where was it wasted. And as we enter the new year, to maybe go ahead and eliminate some time killers and some time wasters, and then intentionally replace just 15 minutes of it, maybe 20, preferably each morning, but at least some point in the day, 15 minutes to just be alone and unplugged, that you ruthlessly protect and guard that time. It's for just you and God. And make part of that time for prayer and part of that time for Bible. And you can join me, you can join some of us. There's a fantastic free app called the YouVersion Bible app. And I'm inviting you to join me and others to go through what's called the chronological Bible. You may not know this, but the typical Bible is not actually fully chronological with time. It's still fantastic, but we're going to go through it chronologically. The app, it provides a scheduled reading each day. It provides a way for actual mutual encouragement, interaction. It provides something very important for most of us, accountability. So that we can gently shame one another, like, hey, you haven't been, but it makes a huge difference. Any of you have ever done anything fitness or weight related, you know what a difference it makes to go through it with somebody. Same thing here. And it gives you a chance to share thoughts and questions. And if you've been part of New Life for any length of time and you gave permission, I'd like for you to go ahead, that we could communicate with you. I'd actually like you to pull out your phone if you don't have it out already. Shop it on Amazon. But yeah, so I literally mean this. Go ahead and pull out your phone. If we have your contact information, you're pretty sure we do. Because you should have a text from me that I magically made come out about a quarter till. And the text message is just simply inviting you to go through the Bible in a year. And if you would like to do that, just simply reply, I'm in. No pressure. But if you'd like to do that, just reply, I'm in. And then you're going to get more instructions before the end of the year. And if you didn't get a text, then please make sure you fill out one of the orange cards that's on the table on your way out. Give me your contact information so that we can communicate with you if you want to be included. Or even if you don't necessarily want to do the app the way we're going to do it, you prefer old school, like you open something physically, or you want to take a different approach, that's great. It doesn't matter how you approach this. But I'd love for you to fill out a card or message me or somehow let me know that you're going to do that. Because then that way, again, we want to do this together as a community, okay? Because if you'll do this, and if we'll do this together, I promise, money back guarantee, this will play a huge role in you learning about and experiencing God like never before. Let me pray for us. Father, I'm so grateful for those that took the time to write down what we had, those that you prompted to do it, that you somehow put in their hearts and in their minds that this was something that needed to be done. And then, Father, that you guided them into what to document and to keep track of. And for those that throughout history, sometimes at the risk of death, to maintain and protect these documents that were meticulously copied and passed down. And Father, for those that on this side of the cross that we know literally gave their lives so that we could have the text in a language we could read. And so, Father, I pray as we move into this new year for all of us, because on this side of things, you can seem so far away and so distant, and our lives can seem so overwhelming. We're just so caught up and occupied with just getting through the day and being all that we need to be as a student or as an employee, as a spouse, as a parent, as a single professional. But God, I pray like never before for all of us that you would intersect with our lives in an unmistakable way. That 2025 might be a defining year for every one of us, no matter how long we've been your follower, a follower of Jesus, if even yet a follower. And I pray, Father, for all of us that will engage your word in the coming weeks and months, that you will help it to come alive and that you will provide understanding, because, Father, there are a lot of confusing things, and there are a lot of things that we're reading that we don't fully know the context in which they were written, which makes such a difference. But I pray, Father, that you would lead every single one of us in this process, that we might understand and know you and how to apply it to our lives. I pray all this in the name of Jesus.